morning, Redemption. How you doing this morning? We're glad that you are here. Hey, we're going to be in Genesis 47, 48, and 49 today, okay? We got a little bit of work to do, all right? And next week we'll be finishing out the book of Genesis, all 50 chapters, and it's been quite a journey, right? And so looking forward to wrapping this up next week. But man, it's Christmas season, right? How many of you have started your Christmas shopping? Raise your hands. I'm sure a majority of the room. How many of you are fully done with all your Christmas shopping, right? There's some of you here as well. You guys are overachievers, all right? Just so you know. And so, but we're glad that you're here. This week I was looking at the top 2023 Christmas gifts. And there's multiple lists out there, but on this one list, the number one thing on the list was a mystery fisherman's box. So if you like to fish, it was a box that you would get once a month, and inside that box would be a variety of things that you may or may not like. And so that was the number one thing on the list. I thought that was pretty interesting. Number 3 on the list was something that was super lame to me, but it was a rose inside a glass cylinder, and that was the number 3 thing on the list. And the description was, give this to your special someone and they'll always know that you love them. So if you needed to know how to find that gift, it's a rose inside a glass cylinder, right? There you go. Another on the list, which I don't understand these things totally, but on the list was a everywhere belt bag. All right, now you've seen these are gaining popularity. You put it over your shoulder, all right? Pastor Danny has one, all right? Amy Steed has one, a.k.a. fanny pack. If you grew up in the 80s, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so the everywhere belt bag was on the list. It was number 4. Number 12 on the list for all Star Wars fans. And if you're a Star Wars fan, raise your hand. All right? There's some of you in here, okay? A lot of you, I should say. I might be one of the few that's like, it's okay, whatever, you know. I can take it or leave it. But number 12 on the list was lightsaber chopsticks, all right? And so that made the list for the maybe 2 times a year you get out chopsticks, you can have lightsabers, all right? And so maybe you guys could all get them together. You could have your own little special dinner, right? And post social media on it about all the Redemption Church family like Star Wars, and we all have our special chopsticks, and the rest of us can just laugh at you, okay? Okay? And so that could be kind of a fun time together. Here's what's interesting to me when I look at the list. The list was super lame. It was super lame, all right? And what was fascinating to me about looking at each item on this list, there was many things listed, was that there was no information about how to develop a relationship with the creator of the gift. You see, no one was interested in who made the rose in the glass cylinder. I want to know that person. Whose idea was it with the lightsaber chopsticks? I want to have a relationship with that person. But why does the article not speak to the creator? Because the truth is no one cares, right? We simply just want to buy and own the specific thing that we like. Our gospel takeaway this morning that I want us to filter everything through, we'll get to that in a minute. Let me go back up. I'm jumping ahead of myself. The question I want us to process first is this: why are we so distracted by the blessing? Why are we so distracted by the blessing? You see, so many times in our lives, we find ourselves distracted, I would argue, in the Christmas season, right? We have all sorts of shopping to do. We have huge lists for everyone in our family, right? Maybe you have to host a variety of family Christmas parties or attend a bunch of parties, or maybe you have your kids' Christmas program coming up. Our schedules get so busy in December. This week, I get to go to my kids' Christmas program. I have 3 kids in 3 different age groups, which means I get to be there for a super long time, and I'm really excited about it, okay? It's a season that brings on busyness, Christmases. And so because of that, I think it's easy for you and I to actually be distracted. We can get busy by all sorts of things in our life, but here's the truth. We can often be distracted by really good things, by things that are actually really good. But how often do we think about the creator of those things? Our gospel takeaway for this morning, which is incredibly important, is this: it's never about the what of the blessing, it's always about the who behind the blessing. It's never about the what of the blessing, it's always about the who behind the blessing. And so as we come towards the end of the book of Genesis, we see Jacob's family has traveled all the way to Egypt because of a severe famine. They've left Canaan. They're now going to Egypt. And they've often, to be honest, they could be distracted. We get distracted by busyness, but Jacob's family was distracted by starvation. You see, it was all about survival. It was about making it another day. We don't really know what it's like to be distracted in that way, but they were distracted by things we've actually never faced. And so we're going to pick it up in Genesis chapter 47. And let's take a look at what it says, starting in verse 1. It says this: So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers with their flocks and herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen." And from among his brothers he took 5 men, presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." And they said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land, and let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." And then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and he blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of my years of my sojournings are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their sojourning." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. And then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them possession in the land of Egypt and the best of the land in Ramesses, as Pharaoh has commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents. And so here's the story. Joseph's family has come to meet him in Egypt. Joseph is now second in command of all of Egypt, and Joseph is now about to introduce his family to his boss. And his boss is Pharaoh. And honestly, Pharaoh is the most important person in the world at the time. You see, Pharaoh believed this about himself. Pharaoh believed that he was God. He believed that he was the God-man. And just like we would believe in the incarnation of what Christmas brings, Pharaoh believed that, yes, he was man, but also he was God, that he deserved to be worshiped. And anytime a human declares that they deserve to be worshiped, I would make this argument. That's probably a pretty dark place, spiritually speaking. But isn't it interesting how God often brings his own into spiritually dark places to bring the light into that place? We read it. Joseph picks 5 of his brothers, not all of them. He picks 5 to present them to Pharaoh. What do you think that interaction would be like? I think often about reading stories about when people had a chance to meet Queen Elizabeth. You see, when you'd meet Queen Elizabeth, you probably wouldn't go up to the queen and say, "Yo, what's up, queen?" Right? Why wouldn't we do that? That would be disrespectful, right? So you'd probably say things like, "Your Majesty." A woman would bow, right, as a sign of respect. A man would bow his head as a sign of respect to the queen. If you were invited to eat at the queen's table, the food would be put in front of you. You couldn't take a bite until the queen grabbed her fork and took a bite first. And when the queen put her fork down and she decided that she was done, you were done, no matter how much food you had left on your plate. Why? It was all about respect. And I'm sure Joseph, as he brings his brothers and fathers in to meet his father and to meet Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world, I'm sure respect was a big issue in this moment. Have you ever met someone important like that? Like someone that's kind of a big deal? How often can we get distracted by what's happening in that moment? Think about Joseph's brothers walking in, coming to shepherds from Canaan, now walking into the palace, into the throne room of Pharaoh. There would be so many things to be distracted by. They can be distracted by the wonder and the beauty of Egypt. They can be distracted by the fact that they're starving. They can be distracted by the fact that they need an outcome here that will better serve their family. Remember what God told Jacob? We saw it last week, that God told Jacob this: I will be with you. And so my promise from God to Jacob wasn't just about land, it was actually about people. You see, it's never about the what of the blessing. It's always about the who behind the blessing. And the who here is God. And God is saying this, I am in charge. And so God has graciously worked to reunite Jacob and Joseph and their family all together in Egypt. God is the one who's made that possible in his own sovereignty at this exact moment. Which then means this, as they go in to meet Pharaoh, the world's most powerful man, God is absolutely with them. God's been working the whole time. The end of chapter 46, we saw it last week, that Joseph prepped his brothers and his family. Hey, we're going to go meet Pharaoh. And when we meet Pharaoh, he's going to ask you what your occupation is. And you need to say this, that you're a shepherd, which is true. Because I want you to be in the land of Goshen. It's the best land in all of Egypt. And I want my family to actually be in the very best spot for the rest of this famine. So they walk in and see Pharaoh. And what's the first question Pharaoh asks them? What's your occupation? They say, we are shepherds. And because Pharaoh loved Joseph, he blesses his family. He gives them the land to settle in Goshen. He literally tells them, gives them a job. Hey, all the livestock of Egypt is going to go over there too. Maybe they can take care of that as well. You see, here's the thing. Pharaoh and Joseph's relationship had to be interesting because for Pharaoh, it wasn't about the who behind Joseph. It was about the what blessing he's received out of Joseph. Right? He received the wisdom that a famine was going to come. And we get to verse 7. I want you to see it again. It says, then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, but the most powerful man in the world. And it says this, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. That's fascinating to me. Over 80 times in the book of Genesis, it talks about the word blessing. It's talked about more in the book of Genesis than any other book in the whole Bible. And the contrast couldn't be more different between these two characters. You have Jacob. He's 130 years old or whatever at this time. He's an old dude. He was a shepherd, which isn't a great occupation. And he's here with his family, which is about 70 people. Compared to Pharaoh, the guy who has literally no need in the whole world, who has everything at his disposal, who's leading an entire country with the world's greatest army, with the greatest amount of wealth probably. There couldn't be a greater contrast when you think about how our world would see this part of the text. What would Jacob have to offer Pharaoh? What could he actually give him? Pharaoh has no needs. How often is it the powerful that blesses the weak? Here we see it flipped. The weak is blessing the powerful. You see, here's the truth. When you are a person of God, it's not about what you can give to somebody. It's about who. It's about who you give away. And here we see Jacob standing before Pharaoh, and he can give the Lord away. And here's what's crazy. Think about what Pharaoh has brought to the world. Mummies and pyramids. I've never been to the pyramids. How many of you have been to the pyramids before? Anyone here? Okay, couple people. I would love to see the pyramids one day in my life, right? And I'm sure they get millions of visitors a year to go pay money to actually see the pyramids. Here's what I know about the pyramids. How many lives have the pyramids changed? 0. This many. Right? And so Pharaoh, that's what he's given the world. But think about what Jacob is doing here. He's giving away the Lord, right? He wants to bless him. Like he's the one, right, who's been behind Jacob the whole entire time. He's the one who's made a promise to go with you, to be with you wherever you go and whatever you might actually face. He promises a blessing of land, of descendants. He promises the coming Savior we know is going to come out of the line of Jacob. And so we get to learn this as people today, is that the greatest thing we can give away from generation to generation is the Lord. It's the who over the what. In verse 13 through 31, we're not going to take time to read it, but this contrast between Jacob and Pharaoh starts to grow from not just Jacob and Pharaoh, but it literally grows from Jacob and his family and all of Egypt. While Jacob's family is doing great in Goshen with the land they have in Egypt, Egypt itself is in a downward spiral. We're going to see, just mentioning it, the depletion of the wealth of the Egyptian people while Pharaoh is going to gain all of the wealth. And it's going to be pictured in three ways. I'm going to mention them. We're not going to take time to read it, but it's literally from money to livestock, from livestock to land, and from land to freedom. Those are the three categories. Well, what am I talking about? The first is this, from money to livestock. Remember, a famine is going on. There's still a few years of famine left. And so if you're an Egyptian citizen, you've been using your bank account to go up to Joseph and buy food so your family can actually live. Question, what happens when your bank account hits zero? What happens when you run out of money and the famine's still going on? You see, here's what they did. They had to then give away their next greatest asset, which was their livestock. So they came to Joseph and to Pharaoh, and they would trade their livestock for food so their family can eat. And so what happens, though, when you run out of money and you run out of livestock? You have to give the next greatest asset you have, which is your land. And so after giving all their money to Egypt and Pharaoh, after giving Pharaoh all of their livestock, which now Jacob's family is taking care of, they would give their land away to receive food so they could actually live to see another day. But what happens after you run out of money, you run out of livestock, you give away your land, your greatest possession, what's left? It's yourself. That's all that there's left to actually give in the rest of the story. You see, the people of Egypt own nothing by the end of the story. And Pharaoh owns everything. It's as if the Egyptians are slaves to their own king. And Jacob and his family are free over in Goshen. Think about how that's going to switch in the book of Exodus, right? But look at verse 27 and 28. Let's see what's happening with Jacob's family while that's all going on in Egypt. Look at it with me. It says, verse 27, thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and they were fruitful, and they multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. Again, the contrast couldn't be any greater here. What's going on with Israel, with Jacob's family, while Egypt is struggling? They're winning, and Egypt is losing. They're gaining, and Egypt is forfeiting everything over to their king. The contrast, again, couldn't be greater. Listen, in the study of the book of Genesis, God has promised all sorts of things, and it comes down to three categories. The first is this, it's seed, land, and covenant. Seed, land, and covenant. Now think about what's happening here. The Egyptians have no seed to even eat. They can't plant anything. They have no land, and they're not part of the covenant. Think about Jacob's family in this text in Egypt, right? They have the promise of the Messiah through the seed. They have a land to take care of all their people and their animals, which is not the promised land. And they have the covenant. There are people with God. God saying, I'm with you and I'm absolutely for you. The contrast is significant in this text. You see, it's never about the what of the blessing. It's always about the who behind the blessing. Check out chapter 48 with me. Let's look at the first few verses. It says this. After this, Joseph was told, behold, your father is ill. So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And it was told to Jacob, your son Joseph has come to see you. Then Israel summoned his strength, sat up in bed, and Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz on the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you the company of peoples and give you this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. And now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. So at the end of the story here, at the beginning of chapter 48, we learn that Jacob is dying. He's 147 years old. He's lived for 17 years in the land of Egypt. He's an elderly man, and he's on his deathbed. And Joseph takes his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim to go and see their grandfather. Now Manasseh and Ephraim, their names mean forgetful and fruitful. Do you remember that? Forgetful and fruitful. Their names were incredibly intentional by Joseph because when his sons were born, they were born in his greatest wound of betrayal from his family. And so he named his sons because of the blessing that they actually brought to him, forgetful and fruitful. But Jacob is near the finish line. I want you to put yourself into the emotion of this text. Joseph missed a lot of his life with his father. He's gained 17 years with him, which means out of his whole 100 and something years that Jacob's lived, he's had 34 years with Joseph. And he's about to die. And the truth is this, most of us know what it's like to get that call that a loved one's about to pass. We know what it's like to get that call to say, hey, now it's time to gather the family. We're going to meet up at the hospital around the bed, and we're going to pray, or we're going to just take time to celebrate memories, or whatever that has looked like in your life. Or maybe it's been gathering in the living room, right, with a loved one who is about to pass. The emotions are high. What does Jacob want to do with his last breaths? Does Jacob want to talk about the great family vacations they went on? No. Does Jacob want to talk about how his sons messed up? Not right now, no. Does Jacob want to talk about his greatest memories? No. What Jacob wants to do is he wants to talk about handing off the baton, and he wants to talk about the Lord. He wants to talk about leaving a legacy, because Jacob has historically been passive as a spiritual leader, and now we see him being incredibly intentional. In fact, Jacob actually gives this testimony to Joseph. Do you know the difference between a biography and a testimony? A biography is about what you've done to fix your life. A testimony is what Jesus has done to fix your life. And what Jacob does is he reviews with Joseph and his grandsons his own testimony. The exact place that he actually encountered the grace of God. I was on the run because of my own sin. I was abandoned by everyone in my family because of how I treated everybody. I was running for my life, and God's grace met me in that moment, and it changed me. When was that for you? When did you encounter the grace of God in such a way that you were overwhelmed by his kindness, and it changed your life? This is the testimony of Jacob. I think it's popular in West Michigan to not even have a testimony, to not even know. The testimony that we've heard often at Redemption churches, well, I've always known Jesus. Wrong answer. Wrong answer. You've not always known Jesus. It's absolutely impossible. It's theologically an inaccurate statement, because at one point you were spiritually dead, and when you encounter Christ and his grace, it changes you and you become spiritually alive. When was that moment for you that God wooed you in his grace? You see, Jacob is saying to Joseph, he's saying, the God who your father Jacob, your grandfather Isaac, and your great-grandfather Abraham worshiped was God. He's worthy, Joseph. He's worthy of everything. Give him your worship. He will overwhelm you with his kindness. You can trust him. He was so faithful to me, even when I was never at times faithful to him. He promises to be with you. Trust him. He mentions, we read it, the blessings of the covenant, but then he turns his attention later in the text to his two grandsons. You see, here's the thing. He wants his grandboys to be part of the covenant. Here's the challenge. They were not full Hebrew. They were 50% Egyptian. If you remember the story, Joseph didn't get to choose who he married. He married an Egyptian woman who served another kind of God. They had these boys together, and Jacob says, oh, no, I want to bring these boys into my family. I want them to be part of the spiritual inheritance of covenant with my God. And he literally says, you're not my grandsons, you're my sons. We read it. You are my son. You are entitled to everything that I have. What we see taking place here, church, is the theological concept of adoption. Jacob is adopting his grandsons to be sons. He's inviting them into the family right here in this moment. And later in the story, he blesses them by putting his hands on their head. But what he does is he crosses his hands like this. He puts his right hand on the youngest son's head, and he puts his left hand on the oldest son's head, and he blesses these boys. And Joseph's offended by it because he's blessing the younger over the older, but that's what's happened the whole time. It was Jacob over Esau, right? It was Isaac over Ishmael. And that's the significant thing for us, and we can read right through that, and it can just go over our head, and it means nothing. But what Jacob is doing here is significant by saying the younger over the older, by bringing two kids who are partially Egyptian into the family, because here's what is revealing, that the gospel message is not just for the Jew, it's also for the Gentile. And by the way, that's me and you. Right here in this story, we have 3 adopted kids. It'll be 5 years in March when we adopted them. And in that moment, when the judge took the gavel and hit down on the desk, and many of you were actually there in the room with us, in that moment, they became Tovies. And what that meant is everything that is mine is theirs. Right? Everything. No matter what's happened in their past, which is terrible, no matter the wounds and pain they've experienced, in that moment, everything that is mine became theirs. I was their father. Steph was their mother. They immediately inherited grandparents and aunts and uncles, right? Like immediately their family exploded in size and in wonder and in beauty of people that are going to surround them and before them and love them and all that they are. And it also means this, that no matter what they ever do, they're always going to be Tovies, right? They're sons, and it's my daughter. They can never do anything to lose that. Ephraim and Manasseh, come close. You are sons, Jacob is saying. And for my kids, this place has been significant. I often remember when we first brought them in through foster care, and we sat them down on the couch and told them on a Saturday night, tomorrow we're going to go to Mommy and Daddy's church. And my oldest, Malik, who was 4 at the time, said this, church? Me no like your church. And I said, I'm really glad you're here because your grammar's really bad and so is mine, so this is going to be great, you know. Me no like your church, he says. And then he came into our church and he met some of you. He ran out of church saying, me love your church. And this fall, I went downstairs to tuck him in at night, and I could see he was processing. And I said, buddy, what's up? He said, I'm just thinking, I think I really want to know Jesus. Church, you've had a role in that. You've had a role in my kid's own salvation. Adopted from one of the worst situations, I can tell you, it was terrible. No hope. Terrible brokenness. Into this. Not just the Toby family, into the redemption body. Connecting kids to Jesus for life change. You have a role. What we're doing is bigger than me. It's bigger than us as individuals. It's about our family as a church. And so Jacob blesses his grandsons, makes them sons. And Jacob would have probably been a pretty cool guy to hang out with. That was grandpa, right? But here's the thing, it wasn't about the what, it was about the who behind the blessing. And this is where grace starts to transform lives. These boys, they deserve nothing. They were partially Egyptian, right? I'm sure they heard about all other gods that existed in the Egyptian world, which we know the plagues undo every one of them in the book of Exodus. But yet they came encounter with Jacob. And so this is a special moment. Look at what Jacob says to them in verse 14. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger. and on his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And it says this, and he blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life, long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys, he says. And in them, let my name be carried on, and the name of our fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude into the midst of the earth. Here's what he's saying. God, the promise you made to me, carry it forward through these boys. Do you see what Jacob's doing here? It's not about the what of the blessing. It's about the who behind the blessing. I want these boys to know you, God, is what he's actually saying to them. This is the one who changed Jacob, the one who saved Jacob's life. And with his last dying breaths, he wants to give God away. Hey, son, Joseph. Hey, grandsons, Manasseh, Ephraim. The one behind me is God. And how does he describe God? Look at it again. Shepherd all my life. What's he saying? There's been no part of my life when God's not been good to me. There's been no part of my life where God's not been faithful to me. There's been no part of my life, even when I was running from him, that he wasn't incredibly patient and calling me back to himself. He's my shepherd. He chased after me when I ran. That's the who. And he redeemed me, he says. What does that mean? Listen. Here's what Jacob is saying. In other words, without God's involvement and without Jesus' investment, we would not be the family that we are. Without God's involvement, without Jesus' investment, our family would be destroyed. But because of God's involvement and because of Jesus' investment, he's reunited and restored every part of our family. We know this family. It's utter brokenness. And they're all restored together in Egypt. That's impossible without the Lord. Jacob has done everything he can do for his family. Have you done everything you can do for yours? Yeah, you can bless them physically, your kids. Yep, you can bless them spiritually with a great bank account. That's incredible. It'll serve them really, really well. I'm talking about spiritual legacy. What are you handing down to your babies? It's never about the what of the blessing. It's always about the who behind the blessing. Look at chapter 49. Jacob still on his deathbed. We're going to read the first two verses. It says, then Jacob called his sons and said, gather yourselves together that I may tell you what shall happen to you in the days to come. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. So we've seen Jacob bless Pharaoh. We've seen Jacob bless two grandsons. And now in his deathbed, he's calling his sons together. All the sons gather around. And not only has Jacob told this testimony, but now Jacob is going to give the plan to the sons. And all the brothers are coming to gather around Jacob for their final blessing from their father. And I want to make it clear up front, Jacob does not give them all the same blessing. Some of you are offended right now. He doesn't give them all the same thing. In other words, there's zero entitlement here. Jacob's ought to be honest with each and every one of them. He's going to go one by one, oldest to youngest, and talk about their character, talk about the good and the bad of the future, and who they are and what they've actually done. Now, let's be honest. If we put ourselves in these men's shoes, going to see our father, last time we might talk to him, time to get the blessing, we'd want good news. Here's the thing. It's not about the what, it's about the who. And notice the command in verse 2. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Jacob is speaking as the leader of the family. Jacob speaks as the one who's led everything. Now let me be clear. We live in a culture that has zero respect for authority. Have you seen it? We live in a culture in the world and in the church that often has zero respect for authority. We live in America through entitlement. Right? Like that's the American way. Entitlement. Here's the truth. When loyalty ascends, blessing descends. When loyalty ascends, blessing descends. And so Jacob is going to start with his oldest. And here's the challenge. If the what has your loyalty over the who, it's going to result in chaos in your life. Chaos. When the what has your loyalty over the who, all it ultimately reveals is that you are the authority in your own life. Let's be honest. We've been through the whole book. How loyal have Jacob's sons been to him? Not great. Their loyalty has been to themselves. It was never to their father, and it was never to the Lord. And so Jacob in these blessings is going to deal with reality, and he starts with Reuben, the oldest. Can you just see him? Reuben stepping up to his father. Can't wait to hear the blessing. He's the oldest, right? The American way, the cultural way, is that he would get the best. He's going to be the leader of the family. He's going to step up now into that role. And look at what Jacob tells him in verse 3. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity, preeminent in power, unstable as water. You shall not have preeminence because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it, and he went up to my couch. Uh-oh. He acknowledges, Reuben, you're the oldest. But he's telling him the truth. Reuben, sin has consequences. In your whole life, Reuben, you've been loyal to you. You were never loyal to me. You were never loyal to the Lord. There's no ascending loyalty. Therefore, there's little descending blessing. What could he say? Dad, I was born first. I'm the oldest. Yeah, Reuben, we don't care about that. That's an entitlement kind of statement. That has nothing to do with right now. Here's the blessing for Reuben. He's hearing someone in his life tell him the truth for the first time. You've not been loyal to me. You've not been loyal to the Lord. And then he reveals what what Reuben did to Jacob. You slept with one of my wives. It's bad. You see, Reuben, his whole life, he wanted the blessing of the what, but he didn't care about the who behind the blessing. And I just want to be honest with you. We cannot let the next generation live like this as a church. Like, we got to step into the gap and connect our generations to the who behind the blessing. And Jacob is saying, I've seen zero change in you. I've seen zero regret in you. I've seen zero repentance in you. All you've cared about your whole life is you. Then he moves up to the next two oldest boys. Simeon, Levi, please come closer to the bed. I get to see Reuben stepping back, and these other boys step up and like, oh, we're in trouble. Look at verse 5. It says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed by their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Here's what Jacob is saying to his next two oldest sons. I don't feel safe around you. I don't feel safe around you. You guys are incredibly dangerous. Not only did you kill every single man in Shechem, but what you do is you go around and kill oxen and animals for fun. You enjoy watching things or people suffer. Why is that fun to you? Let's be clear. Jacob's not avoiding. He's not ignoring, and he's not making excuses for his sons. How many American parents would step up and say, well, you don't really know my sons. You don't really know who they are. Jacob says, oh, I know who you are. And I'm going to love you enough to tell you the truth. You're evil. We get to verse 8. We get to the fourth oldest son, Judah. Check this out. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your right hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub from the prey, my son. You have gone up. He stooped down. He crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, blinding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine and his vestment in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. Question: did Judah start good? Is Judah a good dude or a bad dude? Judah's the one who recommended that we should sell Joseph instead of kill him because at least we get money. Judah's one of the brothers who went back and lied to his own father about what they actually did to Joseph. Judah then marries a woman that didn't love the Lord. Probably didn't want to listen to mom and dad's vision for that. Didn't really think about that. He's his own man, loyal to himself. And he married a woman who was really not great. And they had multiple sons. And the sons God described as evil. In fact, they were so evil that God killed the two oldest. He took them all out of the world. These guys need to be dead. That's how bad they are. We also know that Judah was only loyal to himself, and we saw it through his love through prostitution. And at one point, he paid a prostitute for sex, not realizing it was his own daughter-in-law, and he got her pregnant. And what did he say about her? Bring her out here and hang her. How dare she get pregnant like that? And then she handed him the very things that he used for money for the sex. And that was a spiritual mirror for him to say, wait a second, I'm a broken man. Question: did Judah start well? No. Did Judah end well? Yes. It's not about how you start. It's about how you finish with the Lord. And Judah's life is one of total life change. His loyalty shifted from himself, and we saw his loyalty, ascend vertically to the Lord. And then we saw blessings starting to flow after him. We got to see the life change happen in the life of Judah as we've gone through the story. And here's what's beautiful about this. It's a story that we can say this, where Jesus changes everything. This is what happens when you encounter grace. And Joseph says, all the brothers are going to praise you. Judah's line will be one of supremacy and power. Notice the descriptors again in this text. He's going to be a lion. What do lions do? Lions conquer. That's what Christ is. He's the lion. He's going to carry, your lion's going to carry the scepter. They're going to have authority and be in a position of power. And that's going to be true because King David comes from Judah, and ultimately Jesus himself comes from the line of Judah, our Savior. And so our gospel takeaway again is that it's never about the what of the blessing. It's always about the who behind the blessing. And we don't have time to go through every kid here. But I have a question as I think about this. Why do we think that blessing will follow us when God doesn't have our loyalty? Honestly, church, why do we think when we're just all going to be loyal to ourselves that God's blessing is going to come to us on the backside of that? When your loyalty ascends, blessings descend. It's almost like loyalty and blessing is the essence of this vertical relationship. So here's the good news this morning. The who behind the blessing is Jesus. And the good news with him is when you disown him, he doesn't disown you. The good news for him is that when you run away, he's going to come after you. The good news for you there is that if you forsake the Lord, he will never forsake you. He's going to come after you. He's going to pursue you with everything he has because that's who he is. And in spite of all that Jacob's sons have done, he never disowned them as sons. He didn't disown them. They were still his sons. The loyalty impacted their blessings, not their position as sons. So question, isn't it time for us to stop being distracted by the what and to be consumed by the who? That's what the Christmas season is. One thing I love about Jesus is this: even when there's times when I'm not loyal to him, he's still incredibly loyal to me. Is that your story too? That we serve a loyal God? And so this is the God of the Bible. This is the God who changed us lives. This is the God that we celebrate at Christmas, through the incarnation, fully God, fully man, entered into the world to come and stare humanity in the face, to take on our sin, to die our death, was put in a grave, and 3 days later, he rose again. He's loyal. He's loyal to you, and he loves you deeply. And my question is, do you know him? Because what would happen, church, if we would be consumed by the who? We could change our city. We could see God do so many things if we're willing to give him the loyalty and surrender our lives to him. Let's pray. Jesus, I want to thank you for your love for us. Lord, we covered a lot of story today, but I think about your faithfulness is present through the whole story in every single character. Jacob was a mess, and you were faithful. His sons were a mess, and you were faithful. Lord, you're kind to us, and your loyalty should be something that we celebrate daily. And the loyalty that you give to us, Lord, in spite of all that we do, should be, our response to that should be giving you our own loyalty. So I just want to pray, Lord, for those in the room who don't have a relationship with Jesus, for those who can't look back and say, this is when I encountered grace. This is when I saw my spiritual death that I deserved in the face and realized that you can change me. So I just want to pray, Lord, for you to go before the people of Redemption Church and for you to challenge us with your spirit in the ways that we need to be challenged. In your name, amen.